Good evening. I have sure enjoyed reading your papers about ministry partnership and whether to be a solo pastor or an associate and an intern. There's a lot to learn there. I think that as I have read your papers and as I reflected on my own life experiences and working with people and observing situations, that a couple of things that have really come out in my mind just as we think about it. I think about the old hymn that says something along the line that is a sinner by choice and an alien by birth. And anytime we work with people, whether it's with our spouse or our sibling or our children or a ministry partner, we each are sinners and we fail. We may not just fail the other person, we fail the goals and inspirations that we have for ourselves. I think we need to understand that. I think that we also need to understand that God uses tough times in our life to help us learn that so that we can be a better person, that we can be a better servant for Him. So sometimes in those hard places, even as we're working on scheduling this week, for those of us who are highly scheduled kind of people, to work with a person who is overly spontaneous, it's good for both of us to learn. And God uses those tough times like that in our lives in a great way. The other thing that I think about as I have observed what you have written is this. As much as I hate to admit it, I have a lot of 2-year-old passion in my life. Now, theologically, I would call it the sin nature, but it's the issue that I want things done my way now. And my way is the only way for it to be taken care of. And so that causes tensions. That's a tough part of life, and it's a tough part of ministry that we each need to think about. Another concern I have in this whole matter of ministry today is what I would call a growing disdain for cultural differences. One of the humbling things for me as a young pastor was to realize that there were people in my congregation who had heard more sermons than I could ever imagine. They had been in more church services than I could ever think about in my 20-something years of life. That gave me another perspective, and they were so gracious and so helpful to me. I deeply appreciate that, and as I look back over some old sermon notes that I've saved, I groan in embarrassment. Now, as we talk about finding a place to serve, one of the things I have found is that it's very valuable to do interaction outside of an interview that's sitting around the table. One of the things I like to do when I've worked with churches is to do a social event, because it's in that social event that you begin to observe how the person interacts with other people, how the person interacts with their spouse if they're married, how their spouse interacts with people. Those are important issues. I think it's also important, even in the spirit of those questions that I sent to you yesterday, Sunday, to discern what the person's vision is for the church, what their goals are, and to really work on that. Then to ask and direct questions such as, how do you use media in your ministry? Uh, how what would be something creative that you have used in your worship service in the past year? How do you work at organizing and planning a staff meeting? When do the staff meetings occur? Questions like, if I need some help in planning something for my ministry area, would I have freedom to come and talk to you about it? Now, that's I'd like to improve that question some, but I think it's a valid one because I'm not going to listen only for what the answer is. I'm going to listen to the spirit in which it's answered. Does the person, my potential supervisor, stutter, or is there a clarity of saying, I want to be a partner with you? That's an important thing. Those questions that I sent are just an example. I sent them to you so that you can tweak them however you want to tweak them to understand what the person's ministry passions are, what their goals are. I would also pursue finding out references of somebody who has already worked for them. And with the internet today, you could chase down Frank Beatty in Bloomington, Illinois, and find out a lot about me, probably. But if the person who is wanting to be your supervisor doesn't want to tell you the name of somebody who was his previous associate, that tells you a lot. Even if that person did not work out, I'd like to talk to him, learn something about them, discern his passions or her passions for ministry. The value of dialoguing is so important with that person. And, I have contacted other churches in the same community just to ask what they know. I've also contacted businesses that were relatively close to the church, not told them who I was or anything, just said, hey, I'm kind of looking at churches in the area. What can you tell me about this church? And what's their pastor's name? And I learn a lot that way. If they say, oh, I don't know, well, I found out they're not very outreach oriented. Not every pastor will provide your level of desired mentorship, accountability, or support. I want to encourage you to critique that before you say yes. If you ever want to discuss a situation with me, you have my contact information, and I open the door and give you permission to make contact with me. I'd be glad to interact with you, and I'd be willing to be somebody from behind the scenes to ask a few questions. So those are just some things I've been thinking about as I've read your papers. I really love it. You don't know how much I am inspired as I read what you have to say. God bless you. And as we begin this new week, one thing I needed to tell you is that the Larson book about ABFs is to be found in the resource section right on the left-hand side of your paper, Blackboard. There's syllabus and schedule. Right underneath that is resources. That's resources for this class. And you open that, and the first item, I forget what it's called, but it is the ABF PDF copy of the Larson book. So you're to read that this coming week or this week and next week, complete it. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. Don't forget to work on your revised assignments and discussion boards. We've had a little snafu on that this past week, and thank you for everybody for your patience and grace as we work through that. Have a great week.